This is Gemara and Chagigah, Daf Chof Dalit, all learning for this month. The month of Adar has been generously sponsored as a Schusi L'Neshama for Rav Shlomo ben Rav Meir in conjunction with the release of our new book, Baruch Hashem, the laws of Chanukah and Purim. The learning of the entire Chabur should bring an incredible Aliyas Neshama to Rav Shlomo ben Rav Meir as he's oiled to higher and higher place in Gan Eden Shalmaila, as well as the learning Shvius Chashidach plays Chaim Devar. Remember, as he's a kid, that's what I'm going to work as a Shen. That's good. Was a Shen do Shema ben Chayovik ben Teli Shalom ben Levi Zahava, as well as Chos for Shem Shal Yis ben Yevida ben Rav Chaim Zahara Shalom Siv ben Yizay Idol Zaharbas Kanan Lita Basim as Chayisay yourself ben Mendel as a bird in Shalei Shalom as Dami Shavik Shel Chanish Bam Zeli and Chanreis and Chayvas Nina Adinena Bashin Middle Siv ben Yevida Rivka Hashem Dazim Chlas Amram Yakot Sarabas Akila Yisham Yizach ben Asi Yehudis for Avram Rachladai Shimon ben Chanav Gal Barabas Yal Yehudis was Leis Shalom ben Gabriel Baslumi so Yitzchak ben Dina Besoich Shar Chayli Yisrael. We are closing in the final few daf of this incredible Masechta of the entirety of Seder Mayid. Many of you have responded already. Anyone who could be around, I would love to see you Tuesday evening Be'ezrat Hashem as we celebrate the completion of a Seder Mayid, and as well as we're machazik ourselves going forward into Seder Nashim. We pick it up in the Tabel of Dalet and Aleph, and the Gemara is trying to figure out that this din of Rabbi Akiva, is this din a din derabanan or is this din a din daraisa? And just to point out, we'll look back for one moment of Chav Gimel and Beis. We're talking about the din of the Mishnah that says Akli mitzaref masha b'soichel lakodesh avol loy letruma, that a kli combines with that which is inside of it for a kdush, for a kachim, not for truma, which means if I have a cup of grapes, if one grape becomes tamei, the whole thing becomes tamei. And what was the reason? The Gemara quoted a pasuk. And the Gemara asked, but we see from Rabbi Akiva that it's not a din daraisa. We see that it's a din derabanan. So answered the Gemara on the top of today's daf, Chav Dalet and Aleph, Lo nitzcha el sheyarei mincha daraisa sarich hakli hakli mitzarfai. Saying that needs a kli. Now, this is not a physicality. It does not mean a liquid needs a kli, a flour needs a kli. That's not what it means. If we go down that route, the Gemara makes no sense. It means saying that halachically requires the kli. Like we learned that Asara has to be inside this golden spoon of the Ketayres. That is something that needs the Kli. So that needs the Kli, then in Midaraisa, the Kli is Mitzarif, and it's all considered one. But something She'ein Sarich Lekli, so it does not need the Kli, and the Kli Mitzarifai. And on that, that even though you don't need the Kli still is Mitzarifid. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. Teinach Soiles, I understand the flour of all karbanos of a mincha doesn't need a kli. You could take it with your hand. Ketayres u'lavaina ma'ikla meimar, but the ketayres and the vaina require to be brought inside a kli. So says the Gemara, how could it be that it's only a din derabanan? How could it be? It should be, if it needs the kli, what we just said, sarich likli akli mitzarfai, on a daraisa level, it should be considered one entity. Yet Rav Akiva sounds like it was only a din derabanan. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avuki, going shit sabran al gabi kartavla. The case is discussing that you brought the ketayres, you brought the lavaina, not in the kli that it's made for, but rather on like a flat leather stick. Daraisa yesh leitoich mitzarif. On the daraisa level, only saying that it has a little bit of an indentation, a little bit of an interior, then midaraisa combines. But over here, since ein leitoich, there's nothing inside, it's a flat entity, ein mitzarif. So in this case, since you brought the lavaina and the ketayres on something flat, midaraisa, it's not called one entity. And on that, va'asu rabbanim v'takinu davagav din leitoich, says the rabbanon, even though it does not have an indentation, a cavity, mitzarif, it still is considered one entity, and that's how we're reconciling the din that Rav Akiva explained to us, that only combines on the Derabanan level with that which the Gemara started from Rav Acha quoting a pasuk. Rav Chanina. So now we have a reconciliation. We understand Rav Chanina is in daraisa, Rav Akiva is in derabanan. Says the Gemara, all of these cases upliga the Rav Chanan ad Rav Chia barava. Rav Chanan is arguing on Rav Chia barava, the Rav Chia barava, Rav Yecha. May you do Saishal Rav Akiva. Rav Chanan barava learned the Mishnah very differently. We said yes. Rav Chia barava. Rav Chanan explained this in the Mishnah that everything is combined as one entity from a pasuk. Rav Chia Kiva Rava says, no, the whole Mishnah is a din derabanan. He learned me you do say Rabbi Kiva Nishnas Mishnah zu based on the din derabanan of Rabbi Akiva, the din derabanan that anything that is anything that's together is considered one entity. Based off of that, the Mishnah starts. Meaning, we thought we have a Mishnah, din of the Mishnah, then off the din of the Mishnah. So Deraisa, Rabbi Kiva says Derabanan. Says Gemara, no, we have a din of Rabbi Kiva. Based off of that, the Mishnah teaches its din that the entity combines into one. And we continue. We're now in number 8 from the Mishnah. We're about 10 lines down. The two dots are Ravi Ba'Kodesh Ba'Isel. A Ravi in the dinim of Kodshim makes something possible. That the Kodshim goes all the way to Ravi. Again, we mentioned many times. Chulin, regular mundane matters, only goes to Sheni. We have an Av. We have a V'Avois, we have an Avatama, a corpse, and we have a Rishon, and then we have a Sheni. When it comes to Truma, it can become even a Shlishi Latama. A Kodshim, the Chiddush is, it becomes a Ravi. Tanya says, the Gemara Amar Ravi, As Yosi, Menayin the Ravi, Ba'Kodesh Upaisel, where do we know this din from? Explains the Gemara B'dinu, Uma Mechusar Kippurim, Shem Mutar B'Truma. Someone who's Mechusar Kippurim. What does it mean? Someone that is Mechusar Kippurim, it means someone that did everything and he's just waiting to bring the final carbon. So a Mechusar Kippurim is Mutter Ti Truma. He waited his requisite 7 days. He went to the mikvah. He had Harav Shemesh, the nightfall. All he needs in the morning is Vazav, Yoledes. All he needs in the morning is to bring the carbon. So he has everything. In that case, he's mutter b'truma, but he's basal b'kodesh. So a mechusar kippurim, which is allowed to eat truma, yet is not allowed to eat kadosh kachim shlishi. When we have an entity of a shlishi latoma shebasal b'truma that is not allowed to be involved for truma, einay din, is it not obvious as Ravi kodesh that to make the kachim into a Ravi? So says the Gemara, how do we know this entity, this concept, that there's such a thing as a Ravi for Kodshim? It's learned out from Mechusar Kippurim. Mechusar Kippurim can eat Truma and yet cannot eat Kodshim. So a Shlishi which cannot eat Truma certainly cannot eat Kodshim, certainly would create the Kodshim into a Ravi that it would be possible. Says the Gemara, V'lamanu, and we learned Shlishi la'kodesh min ha'Torah u'Ravi b'kal v'chaymer. The entity that by Truma, this thing called the Shlishi, that's a din daraisa min ha'Torah. Ravi, that which we have this concept by Kodshim becomes Ravi, that we learn from b'kal v'chaymer. And explains the Gemara, Shlishi la'kodesh min ha'Torah minayin. Where do we know the case of Shlishi b'kodesh? T'chsiv v'abas asher yagav v'chol tamei lo yoichal, and the flesh which is tamei should not touch anything tamishayit. Milo yaskina. We're not talking the naga b'sheni. It touches a sheni v'kamer achman lo yoichal. So we see that a sheni touches the truma, becomes a shlishi, and you cannot eat it. Teaching us the source that is single the shlishi letama with regard to truma. Ravi mekal v'chaymer the amar the kal v'chaymer, like we just said a moment ago, from Mechusar Kippurim, and that's number 8 in the Mishnah. There is truma and kodshim, and that kodshim is more machmer. It becomes even a Ravi. Truma only could become a shlishi. And we continue in the Gemara. About 10 lines at the bottom. Ubetruma im nitmeis v'chulu. In the case of truma, now we get involved in your hands. The Yadayim Askaniyasim, those who are learning the daily Dirshim Mishtabura, we just had this, that your hands always move around. One of the reasons why we wash our hands in the morning. But now in our Gemara, we're dealing with not the real, but the highest level of Kedusha for Tumah V'Tayra, for Truma, for Kachim, etc. So we said in the Mishnah that if one hand becomes Tameh with regard to Truma, the other hand is Tahar, yes. For Truma, the other hand is Tahar. But in regards of Kachim, if one hand is Tameh, the other hand is Tameh, and you got to put them both into the mikvah. Explains the Gemara 10 lines to the bottom. Rav Shizvi v'chiburim shanu. What we're discussing is that both hands are touching each other when the second hand touches kachim. We just said again in the Mishnah, it says that if one hand is tamei, the other hand is considered tamei with regard to kachim. Explains Rav Shizvi, it doesn't mean stam if this hand is tamei, this hand is tamei. No, it means if I'm touching each hand hand and then I touch food, then it is all tamei, then it has to go into the mikvah. Avol shaloi b'chiburim loi. But if I have one hand which is tamei, and my second hand touches kachim, it does not make that second hand tamei, it does not disqualify the kachim. So Rav Shizvi is learning perhaps a chiddush in the simple reading of the Mishnah. Pshat is not that one hand automatically makes the other hand tamei with regard to kachim. It means if the other hand is touching, when it touches kachim, then it is a problem. Says the Gemara, Abaye asked Abaye, Yad. It says in a brisa, "Ya neguva mitama chavertoi letame lekodesh." A dry hand, a ya neguva, makes its other hand tamei with regard to kachim. Avol loy lechuma, but now with regard to chuma divi Rabbi Yehuda Imer lepasel av loy letame. It makes it possible that you cannot eat it, but doesn't make it tamei timpar tama to something else. So again, what was this brisa? This brisa is discussing your hands wet or your hands dry. If your hands are dry, says Abaye, says Rabbi Yosi, says Rabbi one more time, the first time of the brisa. If your hands are dry, bitame chaver to letame lekodesh, kachim could become tame with dry hands, but not truma. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda says no. Kachim doesn't become tame, meaning what does tame mean? It makes something else tame. It becomes puzzle in itself is invalid, but it does not become tame. So from here we're going to bring a raya to the din of Rav Shizvi. Rav Shizvi learned that in the Mishnah when one hand is tame, it's not that we automatically assume the other hand is tame. But rather, if the hands are touching, when it touches the kachim, then it is a problem. Says the Gemara, if you're telling me that the whole din in the Mishnah, that when one hand is tummy, the other hand is tummy, even when they're not touching each other. Now I understand that the chiddush of Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda is that when it's dry, it's going to be an issue for Chuma, not for kachim, and not for Chuma. And Rabbi is telling us that when it's, I think I said that backwards. Let's say it one more time. Rebbe, the Tanakama, is telling us that when it is dry, it's going to be metami for kachim and not for chuma. And Rabbi Yehuda argues, but that only makes sense if they're not touching each other. If you, like Rav Shizvi, learned that the din in the Mishnah is only applicable when the hands are touching each other and then touching kachim. So what is the novelty of when it's going to become dry? If it's only going to be true that it imparts tuma when A is touching B, when hand A is touching hand B, and then it's touching kachim, of course it's tamei, because my hand is so close, we have to assume that I might have touched it. But if the chiddush is that even without my hands touching each other, it's tamei, then it makes a lot of sense that we have a chumrah of kachim, that even with dry hands, it makes something tamei. So ask the Gemara, seemingly from this brayse, it seems not like Rosh Shizvi. Rosh Shizvi just learned and taught us that the din of the Mishnah is only when hand A is touching hand B. That's when, with regard to kachim, we say that it makes it tamei and not by truma. Says the Gemara, we see from the brayse of Abaye not that way. Says the Gemara, and therefore Abaye argues with Rosh Shizvi. That's not how you learn the Mishnah. How do you learn the Mishnah? The Pashib Shah, like we thought, that when hand A is Tamei, we automatically assume hand B is Tamei with regard to Kachim. Itmar Nami, says the Gemara, we learned similarly on the last line, Reish Lagish Leishanu. We didn't learn the din of the Mishnah, Ela Yadai. Aval Yad Chaveiroi Loi. Turning over to Chavdalit Amad Beis, the din of the Mishnah is not applicable to the hand of your friend. And what did the Mishnah mean when it says your one hand is tamei and makes the other hand tamei? Is the din in your own hand. But if you touch someone else's hand, the other person's hands are not tamei. Says the Gemara, that's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Echad Yadav Echad Yad Chaveiroi Ba'oisei Yad. It doesn't make a difference. If hand A touches hand B, they are both tamei. And similarly explains this braysa that this chumrah is only by the hand that was originally tamei. But lifsal, that's what makes it tamei. It doesn't make it tamei to make something else tamei. And explains Rav Yochanan Mimai, where do I know this din? There are two parts over here. Number one, it's only your hand touching your other hand, but not touching your friend. Number two, that this whole din is only that it makes it tamei, but not that makes it possible, not tamei. Mimai midiktani seifa says in the seifa sheyan mitama chaverta likoidesh. It says that one hand makes the other hand tamei with regard to kachim, avalei lichuma with regard to chuma. Hasulamali, why do I need this case of the seifa? Hatani lereisha. We already learned this din in the meisha with regard to one hand making the other hand tamei. Elolav explains the Gemara Shema Mina from here is Araya. That what's it doing? It's coming to include the hand of your friend. So we have a machlokes in this brisa whether we're also including the hand of your friend. V'af Reish Lakish, it says the Gemara, even Reish Lakish, who's the original Tana, other beis Chayzidam Rabbeinu Ravami, Reish Lakish Echad Yadai, ve'echad Yad Chaviroi ba'oisa Yad Livsol. That hand, the hand that was tummy itself makes something else tummy. Avaloi litamei, it doesn't make it tummy to make something else tummy. Ve'livsol, avaloi litamei, ve'avaloi litamei. No, we read that incorrectly. Let's go back. Echad yadai v'echad yad chaviroi ba'oisa yad. In that hand, livsol avalei l'tamei, and makes it possible, doesn't make it tamei, and that's the level of tamei that it has. Not that it's tamei, that it gives something else tamah, but it makes it possible that in itself is unfit for usage. And says the Gemara 8 lines down, v'livsol avalei l'tamei, and then when it says that it makes it possible, but doesn't make it tamei, that detail tanai. Again, the detail that the item only contracts tamah so much so that it cannot be eaten, it's possible. But not that it makes something else tamei. That is itself a machlekes tanoim. The Tanaim learned in the Mishnah klapaisel b'tshuma mitame yodayim. Anything that is possible for tshuma mitame yodayim liyoy shniyos makes your hand a sheni letoma. And then v'yan mitame chaver to divi Rav Yeshua. So Yeshua is of the opinion that the tuma on your hands does continue from A to B. Chachamim oimrim yodayim shniyos. Saying your hands are secondary, your hands are a sheni letoma. Ve'ein sheni oise sheni bechulin, and a secondary, a sheni does not make another sheni. My love explains the Gemara in the Chachamim. Sheni udalayavid, that one hand does not make the other hand into a sheni. Oh, shlishi yavid, it could make it a shlishi. So what do we see? That according to Rabbi Yeshua, one hand does give over tama to the other hand to make it tameh, whereas according to the Chachamim, it only gives it over to the second hand. It only makes hand be tameh and as much to make it puzzle, but not to make it actually tamei. And that's going to be the same machlokes in Rav Yeshua and the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Maybe there's no difference whether it makes it shani of it. It doesn't make it a sheni. Doesn't make it a shishi. But rather, it's like the following Tanya. The Tanya learned in a braysi and a guva. This should sound familiar. Your dried hands, that's what imparts tama to something else. Letame ba kodesh, to make it tama be kodesh. Avaloi lechuma, but not for chuma. Divi Rabbi. Rabbi Daimer oisayad live so avaloi letama. So says the Gemara that it is a machlekes tanayim whether we say this chomer that one hand makes the other hand tamei means that the second hand is able to give off tama, or rather it just makes it possible. Again, one hand makes the other hand tamei. Now, when this hand touches something else, does that kachim become tamei? What does tamei mean? That it itself can even continue the chain. It itself can even make something tamei? No. Or does it make that item possible? It makes it a lower level. I still can't eat it, but it's not tumah to the extent that it could go on to something else. And we continue with the 10th case in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, you're allowed to eat dry food for truma with hands that are tamei, but not for kachim. Again, my hands are tamei. I'm allowed to pick up a dry food and eat it because the dryness does not allow the contraction of toma. Whereas when it comes to kachim, it does. Says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned in a brayso of Chanina ben Antignis, is there such an idea that something is dry with regard to kachim? It has nothing to do that wet or dry. It sounded like from the Mishnah that dry is a chiddush. That when it comes to kachim, even dryness, it still could transmit tumah. It sounded like from the Mishnah that normally when your hands are dry and the food is dry, it does not contract tumah. But by kachim it does. Frak the Gemara, is it a din? It's something to do with being dry? No, the reason is that because kachim we hold in such a high pedestal, that's the reason why it's mekabel tumah even when it is not wet. So what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? Explains the Gemara, an interesting case. Big machlek is exactly how to learn this case, but let's try to get pashib shad. The case is that when someone put kachim into your mouth, or you push food into your mouth with a stick, so you're not touching the food with your hands itself. And you want to eat another food of chulin, a radish or an onion together with it, iman like kodesh. So when it comes to kachim, if you want to eat kachim together with it, said the Rabbanan, you're not allowed to eat it together when your hands are tamei, even though you shove the first item in your mouth with a stick. And even though it cannot transmit to Toma because everything is dry, for Kachim we are more machmir. What are we more machmir? We're machmir that as you're putting the food in your mouth, you might touch the Kachim in your mouth and make it tummy. Again, you got that piece of Kachim in your mouth because you took a toothpick and you stuck it in. But if you're now afterwards going to go and put a radish or an onion of regular food inside your mouth or nerves and you push that in, you might touch the Kachim and make it tummy. And that's the reason why we have a gezira. Says the Gemara, L'kodesh gazu rabbanan, but it's a special gezira by kachim. L'truma like gazu rabbanan, we're not nervous. You're allowed to use your tummy hands, a bechulin in your mouth, and we're not nervous. It's potentially, truma in your mouth. We're not nervous that it potentially could become tummy. And the Mishnah concluded, and the Mishnah said someone's an einin, a relative, was nifter achman l'tzad and b'chus kippurim. He's waiting for the final kapara, the final karban, after he went to the mikvah, Rav Shemesh, etc. We said for kachim you have to go to the mikvah, but not for truma. Says the Gemara, my taima kivadada in Navi Asiri. Since until this moment, someone who's an oinid, someone who's mechusik kippurim, someone who's waiting for the carbon is not allowed to eat karbanos. Therefore, rachachinu rabbanan tefila. So because they were not allowed to eat karbanos until this point, the rabbanan made a special din. And now that you're starting to eat karbanos, kachim again, go to the mikvah special din by mechusik kippurim and oinid, but it's only by kachim, not by truma. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah on the next year.